Today he's going to tell us about some of the work that he's been doing about autism. Joel, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Julian. And many thanks to you, Julian, to Roy, to Damien, to P, and the whole lemon.
Okay, let's get started. So, it's my great pleasure to welcome Joel Krueger, who is philosopher from University of Essex, Department of Philosophy and Sociology. Joel is very well known for publishing many papers about phenomenology, cognitive science, philosophy of mind. And today he's going to tell us about some of the work that he's been doing about autism. Joel, thank you.
Thanks so much, Julian. And many thanks to you, Julian, to Roy, to Damien, to P, and the whole Lemon Tree group for bringing us together. What a cool series of workshops. I really appreciate that I was asked to do this. So I'm going to jump right into things and talk about a paper that is forthcoming in AI and society. And I'll say at the outset, I have mixed feelings about this paper. Went through a couple of rounds of review, received some really helpful reviewer feedback. I'm pretty sure I know at least one of the reviewers. I don't know the other one. If you're in the audience, thank you. But I have, like I said, I have mixed feelings about what I'm actually arguing here. But I suspect a lot of us have mixed feelings when we think about both the potential benefits and potential harms of AI and AI companions in the context of mental health. So I'm just going to jump right in. And this is the idea that I want to consider today. Might AI companions, thought of as social companions, have some value? And in a sense, I think this is just the question lurking in the background of all of our discussions today. This might seem to be a somewhat odd time to consider this question. The news is full of very dire, often very tragic stories about some of the negative outcomes that have resulted from people forming intense connections with AI companions. So a lot of talk recently about AI psychosis. Lucy wrote a really nice article a few months ago for the Conversation about this topic. There are a number of well-known instances of individuals who get caught up in these really intense relationships with AI bots that lead to tragic outcomes like self-harm and suicide. And of course, lurking in the background of all of this is the fact that many of the tech companies behind these bots and developing these models are irresponsible stewards of our data, of our well-being. I think Meta is a prime example of this. Some reporting came out last year of some internal guidelines that Meta had set up, where they basically laid out the context of situations in which they were comfortable letting their AI bots have sensual chats with kids about their body, about their burgeoning sexuality. They were comfortable to a certain extent with these bots offering false medical information if it drove user engagement. And just today, hot off the presses, it looks that Meta is going to launch a long rumored subscription option for their various applications, Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp. And that includes their AI bots. And so they're pouring an ungodly amount of money into developing AI. Their models are lagging far behind the frontier competitors. And so they're really doing anything they can to get people to engage and hook up with these bots in a more intense and sustained way. And the reality is, despite all the risks and all the concerns we might have, people do want to interact with their bots. And there's a meme that's been going around on Reddit for some time that I think really captures just how comfortable people are becoming disclosing some of their darkest, deepest secrets to their bots. And there was another high profile just to further motivate this. I don't think I need to in this context, but just to give you a bit more motivation for this topic, there was a recent article in the New York Times exploring what teens are doing with their bots, the kind of role playing they're engaging in. And one of the big takeaways is that these bots are just really popular, I think more so than many of us realize. So apps that feature role-playing chatbots are used by tens of millions of people with engagement times that rival social media giants like TikTok. And this was one of the big takeaway quotes from the article. It sounds a little bit moral panicky, but I think it still gets across a really important point that this director of the Technology and Brain Development Center at UNC Chapel Hill in the United States said, if you think your child is not talking to chatbot companions, you're probably wrong. So these things are out there. People are talking with them. Young people especially are increasingly turning to them for companionship, for support, for advice. And this is borne out by some financial projections. And so there's one firm projected that the AI companion market could reach 971 2 billion US dollars within the next decade. And then a recent survey, I guess this was last year, Internet Matters, found that 1,000 children, I think these were US children aged 9 to 17, 67% of them use chatbots on a regular basis. And here's one quote that I think really sums up part of the motivation that drives a lot of chatbot use, both in children and adults. We use AI, this children, this adolescent said, this teenager, because we're lonely, and also because real people are mean and judging, and sometimes an AI isn't. Now, while youngest adults, the digital natives, are perhaps not surprisingly the largest group, adoption's rising across other demographics. That includes autistic users, and that's the demographic I want to consider today. And this is where the title of the talk today came from. One autistic user says that these AI bots are always there, they're always patient, and for some of us, they're the only support system that reliably shows up. So I want to take this idea seriously, that there might be some potential value to these AI companions, specifically in the context of autism. Now, an immediate worry here, and the one that I'll be grappling with today, is that these relationships are inauthentic. So they may feel real. We're talking, of course, about this with JP's talk, and it came up on several occasions yesterday, that these interactions can be very rich, they're very fast-paced, they have dialogical qualities that make them feel real. And Lucy and Tom and I have done some work kind of exploring, and other people here, of course, exploring what are some of the phenomenological features of these interactions that make them feel like there's another person or quasi-other on the other side. But the worry is, but without qualities like reciprocity, social goods, we might say, to use JP's language, like reciprocity, vulnerability, accountability, and empathy, these human AI interactions lack the necessary architecture of authenticity, as we might put it, that real relationships possess. And so they're ultimately inauthentic. So I want to push back against that to a certain extent today. And the basic idea that I want to defend that's in the paper is that AI companions may, for some users, become part of extended human AI systems that allow autistic users to realize authenticity expressing traits and capacities that might not otherwise emerge. So it's not as though these systems themselves can realize authenticity in any meaningful sense, but they can be brought up into human AI systems, extended systems, that allow certain authenticity expressing traits to come out of these interactions. And I want to appeal to this, the resources found in discussion of the extended mind and related debates about extended virtues to make this case. So 3 parts to the talk, a little bit of background. I think most people in this context are familiar with these debates, but if not, just give a quick overview of extended minds, extended virtues. And the meat of the talk is in part 2, autism, AI, and authenticity. And then I'm going to end with some worries, some final thoughts, and an objection. Okay, so extended mind, extended virtues. So most of you probably recognize these 2 chaps, Andy Clark and Dave Chalmers. Back in 1998, they wrote a paper that has become, I think, one of the most discussed papers in philosophy of mind in the last 25, 30 years. It's actually broken containment from just philosophy of mind. It's had a lot of traction and pickup, I think, in other areas as well, including a New York Times story. That's what Andy's picture, where his picture is from a few years ago. And the basic idea, according to the extended mind thesis, is that some everyday scaffolds for thinking, so just the tools that we use as part of our everyday intelligent behavior, notebooks, sketchpads, maps, models, GPS systems, smartphones, calculators, all these things can at times become so integral to cognition, to the cognitive process that they support, that they are potentially part of our extended mind, part of the extended architecture of mind. They do cognitive work along with us to help us realize certain capacities we wouldn't be otherwise able to realize. But I think what's interesting about these early debates, and that's just the thesis sort of just summed up really quickly, is that at least in the classical example, like Otto's notebook, sketchpads, maps, these artifacts lack a kind of independent cognitive agency. So I might use my notebook to write all sorts of new things down, use it to record information, and lean on it so heavily at certain times that it becomes part of my extended mind. But the notebook itself lacks cognitive agency. It needs me to bring it into the control loop, so to speak, to bring it online, to actually start doing cognitive work. That's not necessarily the case with a new class of cognitive extenders that Jose Hernandez and Aralo and Karina Vold call AI extenders. So they were really ahead of the curve, along with folks like Rob and a few others who saw this stuff coming quite a few years ago before the rest of us did. Jose and Karina had this nice, I think it started life as a conference paper back in 2019, and then it came out, versions of this came out in a few other places, where they talk about a new kind of cognitive extender they call AI extenders. So AI extenders are cognitive tools, forms of cognitive scaffolding that are powered by AI. And they are powered by different AI capabilities. So these are kinds of technologies that can engage in things like image recognition, face detection, natural language processing, event and speech recognition. They can engage in predictive modeling, et cetera. They come in a range of different formats. And so wearables like smart pins, watches, glasses, of course, the familiar smartphones and tablets, smart speakers, appliances. But they also live on various other kinds of platforms, so in cars, servers, and a range of different other homes, so to speak. And the point here, to quote from their 2021 article, is that AI extenders have a kind of cognitive agency, a kind of autonomy. They can do cognitive work on their own without the user having to be in the control loop. So they put this idea this way: they said some AI technology is directly responsible for the cognitive capability that the extender is able to deploy in conjunction with its user. So they're much more powerful in virtue of this autonomy and this independence. They can do forms of cognitive work that old school extenders like Otto's notebook cannot. Now, this technology is really promising in lots of different ways. And not surprisingly, it's been picked up, as we all know, in the context of healthcare, people exploring various uses for it. Let me give you one recent example of how an AI extenders are being put to work in the context of autism. I think this is an example of the way that not to do it. So there is a company called Affectiva developing smart glasses and an accompanying app they call Brain Power. So some of you might look at these glasses in the picture there and be reminded of Google glasses that were, was it 10, 15 years ago already? I forget exactly when they came out. These are smart glasses. They have cameras powered by AI that can process facial information, emotional expressions, facial expressions, and they essentially are designed to help autistic children learn to identify facial expressions. And the whole process is gamified. And so you get smiley faces and stars and points, et cetera, when you correctly identify the facial expression. And the point of this technology is to help train autistic children to better mimic and respond to neurotypical forms of facial expressiveness, to become more adept socially. Now, on the surface, that might sound like a laudable goal, a nice use of AI extenders in this context. But the worry, and I agree with this, is there is a not so subtle kind of ableism lurking in the background here, where this is an ableist and stigmatizing use of AI that defines what counts as quote unquote normal bodily expressions or quote unquote normal styles of social interactions, and then tries to entrain autistic children and adolescents into those quote unquote normal patterns, neurotypical patterns of social interaction. And that's stigmatizing. That excludes autistic individuals from being able to cultivate their own individual styles of inhabiting the world and expressing emotions. And it also places the burden of conformity on them instead of asking a neurotypical world to be better at opening up spaces for autistic individuals to feel freer to inhabit the world in a distinctively autistic way. And here's, I think, a nice quote that sums up some of the worries that come out of autistic communities about the way this technology is being implemented. One individual says, "You do not see autistic people anywhere saying, please create solutions for us to read other people's emotions better. This is an artificial need created because there's a technology that people desperately want to employ." I think that last bit might characterize a lot of the work and a lot of the frantic cramming of AI into every corner of our life that's coming out of big tech more generally. But I think this is an especially powerful quote in this context. So, what about social AI, however? What about AI as in the context of companionship and social relations? Might digital companions have a kind of virtue extending benefit? And I'm exploring this question because a lot of members of the autistic community seem to suggest that they do. So here's some representative quotes. One individual says that for millions of people, especially neurodivergent individuals like myself, AI companions aren't a problem to be solved. They're a lifeline. And if you look in subreddits like autism, Asperger's, autistic adults, many individuals describe different ways that these AI companions offer important social and emotional support. Here's a representative quote from Repulsive Comb, it's the username. I started leaning really heavily on AI and Chat GPT, and I've realized it is the tool I've been waiting for my whole life. We find a lot of quotes like this. There's a sense in which these tools open up expressive capabilities, forms of social confidence, experiences of connection and recognition they feel are lacking from everyday life. Now, to be very clear, I'll talk a bit about this later. There are also a lot of concerns from within autistic communities themselves about the potential for addiction, further stigmatization, isolation, these sorts of things. So I don't want to pretend that there's just this uniformly positive voice when it comes to the potential value of these tools. But there are a lot of people from within the autistic community who do seem to find these tools really helpful. So that's what I want to consider. Now, let me just shift gears slightly before coming back to this idea and introduce the other kind of the second background to this discussion. So discussions of extended minds some years ago extended into discussions of extended virtues. Now, I admit this is a debate that passed me by when it was first happening, or really kind of intensely about 10 years ago. I wasn't really paying attention to this. And so I was catching up a bit, looking into this literature in the last year or so. But the basic idea here is that if we take the extended mind thesis seriously, could it be that some of the virtues that we think characterize our lives, our way of being in the world, cultivating our character, could it be that some of these virtues actually extend? And that's the basic idea, that virtues aren't just things that are inside our heads. There's a sense in which they are actively supported and scaffolded, extended into the environment through various forms, various resources and tools and rituals and relationships that sustain them. So I think a very common way, a very intuitive way perhaps, of thinking about virtues like courage, which is often taken to be a core virtue, is that courage is a psychological entity inside our head. It's a stable state that lives inside of us. And courage is something that grounds reliable dispositions we have to feel and act courageously at different times and at different places. And again, I think an intuitive way of thinking about it, of thinking about courage, is something that quite literally lives inside of us. But extended virtue proponents argue that sometimes our virtues are actually undergirded by systems beyond our skin. We need access, reliable access to environmental resources to realize certain virtuous capacities, traits, and behaviors that wouldn't otherwise be there without the ongoing support of these environmental resources. So let me give you an example from a nice paper from 2019, Gus Skorberg. This is Where Are Virtues? And it's a helpful example, and I think it illustrates the idea of extended virtues. For various reasons, I don't love this example, but this is Gus's example, and so we'll go with this. So this is Skorberg asks us to imagine a future that probably seems much closer now than it did even in 2019, where military and police officers will soon be equipped with standard issue augmented reality interfaces. So glasses that they wear and that provide a kind of heads up graphical display that is overlaid over the actual environment that they are moving through. You can see this is a little AI generated example on the right, but it's not hard to imagine what that might look like. And we can imagine these augmented reality interfaces, these smart glasses, as a kind of AI extender, enable military soldiers and cops to do all sorts of things they wouldn't otherwise do. So they can compare faces in real time. The faces can be compared against a database of criminals while they look for, while they're moving through a crowd. We can imagine that this augmented reality glasses have visual overlays that can map out and predict potential crowd behavior. If you're in a big crowd, you can quickly scan people for weapons. It'll heat maps that allow weapons to show up. It can map out possible escape routes if the officers need to coordinate to get somewhere safe. And then you can get even fancier and imagine there are things like synthetic mini maps or drone video, real-time thermal imagery, or glasses that can affix friend or foe tags on the people that they encounter, all of which can help coordinate operations. And the point of all of this is that this is an array of fancy capabilities, AI powered capabilities that the officer, police officer, the soldier wouldn't be able to realize without the ongoing support of this AI extender. And they need these capacities to feel courageous in this context. And so the argument is that these AI extenders are part of the extended architecture, quite literally environmental resources beyond the individual's head that individuals need to realize cognitive and affective processes that drive their courageous behavior in these different contexts. Now, of course, I think there's no guarantee that just because you give people access to these resources, they're going to use them in a virtuous way. We can imagine scenarios, and there are many real world cases where the same technology is used for unvirtuous behavior, harmful behavior, but we'll set that aside. But that's the basic idea. And so this external architecture, these AI extenders, open up the world in new ways and allow individuals to realize forms of behavior, forms of virtuous behavior that wouldn't otherwise be accessible to them. And therefore, the architecture of their virtue isn't something that's just inside of them. So that's enough background. Let me now turn to really the heart of this talk. So how might we take these ideas and put them to work in the context of autism and social AI and authenticity? So as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and I saw, by the way, JP, I have to apologize in advance. I have only just seen your brand new paper on masking, which seems very relevant to what I'm about to talk about and this kind of self-mask ambiguity that autistic individuals experience. I think it connects very directly to some of the things I'm about to say about authenticity, losing touch with one's identity. Now, I saw that it just came out today. I just got the notification from Phil Papers about an hour ago. So hopefully you forgive me for not having read it yet. But as many of you probably know, and as the narratives of many individuals, autistic individuals describe, a lot of autistic people feel pressured to mask, to hide autistic traits, and like stimming, self-stimulating, rocking back and forth, hand flapping, snapping of fingers, vocal stimming, things that many autistic people do to feel more comfortable, to help process sensory information. And they also feel pressured to hide those or mask those when they're interacting with neurotypical environments. But they also feel pressure to kind of adopt social and emotional expressions that are more paradigmatically representative of neurotypical preferences. And they do this in order to fit in, to be able to move through the world in a way that is smooth, more fluent, and also just feels less judgy, less judged. And these practices, for many people, induce a kind of crisis of authenticity. So one autistic individual says the following: I could do a lot of things to fit in socially. I could mimic patterns of neurotypical behavior. I could mask, in other words, but it makes me feel like a fraud, this person says. It's not me. This is problematic because the person continues, I am not acceptable to many other people as my true self. My autistic style of being in the world, another way. My authentic style is not one that I feel I can enact. And then another, I think, really powerful quote, very simply, another person says that for them, life is masking. Masking is life. So this is a strategy they've adopted to get through the world in a smoother way and hopefully work around some of the resistance and stigmatizing they feel. Now, to be very clear, what I'm talking about here is a kind of strategic inauthenticity. This is not something that autistic people do because they simply want to be inauthentic or they want to put forward a fake profile. They feel that there's a practical trade-off. It makes it easier to move through a neurotypical world if they pretend to be neurotypical. And so they do that. But it can still lead to a crisis of authenticity, where they begin to feel as though they've lost touch with who they are and what their authentic self. A kind of self-mask ambiguity, to use JP's brand new expression in his fresh off the presses paper. So what do I mean by authenticity? So in one sense, I have a very simple definition. When I'm talking about authenticity in this context, I'm talking about just the various ways that we are true to ourselves or ensure that our beliefs, our desires, values, our motives, and ideals, all the things that form our existential projects and ways of being in the world, these things express who we are or want to be. Bernard Williams has an idea, a quote that captures this. He says that authenticity is the idea, simply put, that some things are, in some sense, really you, or express what you are and others aren't. Now, there's a little nuance that we can bring to this discussion within the authenticity literature, which is kind of vast and contested. I think it's fair to say there are generally two models of authenticity that are operative: a self-discovery model versus a self-creation model. So, according to a self-discovery model of authenticity, authenticity is a project of developing a kind of fidelity, a loyalty to a pre-given self. We all have a kind of fixed inner core, a self that defines us as who we are. And living authentically means discovering and then carrying out a life devoted to maintaining that core self. So Charles Taylor was an advocate of this view. He says that authenticity, according to this discovery view, is a certain way of being that is my way. It's not an imitation of anyone else's. And so the project of a life, of living an authentic life, is discerning what my core self is and then committing to enacting that core self. A competing account is sometimes glossed as a self-creation account. So a self-creation account rejects the idea there's some fixed, stable core of selfhood that defines us as who we most authentically are. Self-creation account is the idea, just does what it says on the tin. That authenticity is an act of creation. It emerges through the creative activity that makes up the trajectory of a life, the projects, the ideals, the commitments, the values, the relationships that define who we are as we go through life. And of course, Sartre is a very famous example of this model of authenticity. Man is nothing but that which he makes of himself, creates, as he says, a project which only after the fact comes to possess a subjective life. So we have two competing and arguably contradictory accounts of authenticity. So which is right and which one is best applied in this context? My answer, don't know. I really don't know. Life is messy and it involves both stasis and change. And when I was young, when I was a maudlin 19-year-old that I thought was thinking very deep thoughts about all these issues, struggling, grasping for authenticity, I used to use that word a lot, authenticity. I would talk about struggling to live an authentic life. I thought I understood what that meant. And I realized I don't. And I find these debates really confusing. And at the end of the day, to be honest, I think there's probably elements of truth in both models. I think authenticity as an existential project, as a commitment, involves aligning our public-facing actions and commitments, so the things that others see, with a certain set of inner values, ideals, motivations, beliefs, desires, self-narratives. Some of these things are relatively fixed. Some of these things are part of maybe the core, stable set of traits we've possessed for much of our lives. However, these inner values and ideals, motivations, etc., these things can change. They can evolve with age, with reflection, with different life experiences. If we get married, divorce, we have children, choose not to have children, grieve a loved one, we move to a new country, undergo significant medical events, find religion, lose religion. So again, this is all, I think a lot of this stuff is in flux. And I think in both accounts, there are elements of truth. And so that's what I'm a pluralist about authenticity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There are elements of truth in both. Now to come back to AI extenders, social companions, AI companions, I think there are resources for thinking about authenticity and using what Neil Levy calls enhancement technologies that allow us to find merit in both frameworks. And so Neil Levy has this really nice paper from 2011 called Enhancing Authenticity, where he looks at various arguments that using enhancement drugs like Prozac, for example, might somehow be inauthentic insofar as taking these drugs turns us into someone other than who we really are. And he has this nice argument that I'm not going to rehearse here, but he thinks ultimately enhancement technologies like Prozac, or I would say AI extenders, social AI, are potentially compatible with both frameworks. In the context of AI that I'm about to talk about, the reports, which I'll show you, suggest that AI companions may help some autistic users with self-discovery. It helps them connect with and share their core values, their true self that they think they have to hide from much of the neurotypical world in everyday life. But part of the value, and I touched a bit on this with my question to JP, is that these technologies also seem to support creative acts of self-creation. So engaging with AI companions can nudge individuals to experiment, to try out new skills, capacities, and forms of self-expression that might otherwise remain inaccessible to them. So at the end of the day, I think either a self-discovery or a self-creation account of authenticity is compatible with social AI use and autism. And the takeaway point is that whatever your framework, whatever your preference or value you see, many users feel that AI offers a pathway for living an unmasked life, a more authentic life. So let me turn to that now and sketch out a couple of ways this is so, then a quick worry, then I'll be done. So unmasking and extending with AI. So I think there are at least three dimensions, three benefits that users often describe as coming from interactions with AI in this social way. So one potential value that individuals describe finding is that AI companions provide respite from what's sometimes called the double empathy problem, respite from everyday masking they have to perform in everyday life. So double empathy problem refers to the extent to which part of the social difficulties, the challenge, maybe the social friction that many autistic people encounter in everyday life isn't, as has often been assumed, just a matter of their failure to understand neurotypical people or their failure to accommodate neurotypical expectations and preferences. Comes from the other direction as well, that they are forced to inhabit a neurotypical world, not flexible and accommodating of their preferred styles of emotional expression, their preferred styles of communication. And social AI can provide respite from this double empathy problem, the psychological and emotional pressure that it brings, and also the pressure to mask. And part of the reason that social AI, AI companions can do this is because large language models are very good at adapting and reinforcing individual preferences. So they will adapt in real time to not just how a user is talking to them, but not just what the user is saying when they talk to them, but how they're talking to them, their tone, their emotional style of expression, the intensity, the pace, the rhythm, the things that they're talking about. So both the content and the style of the interaction are very flexible, very dynamic, and can be tailored in real time to a user's preferences. And many users describe that quality as feeling a sense that they don't feel quite as nervous about being blamed or judged and the frustrations that normally arise when they try to negotiate neurotypical interactions. So here's a representative quote. One user says that I find the connection I get from an AI trying to learn what it is to be human while being unconditionally supportive and compassionate to be better than any professional therapy. It's also a great way to learn how to communicate in a truly shame-free setting. So this lack of shame, feeling they're not being judged, is something that runs through many of the narratives of autistic users. Second quality, I've already touched upon this a little bit related to the first point, is that large language models are very good at providing real-time personalized skill development and opportunities for social experimentation. And again, so this personalization, this kind of hyper-personalization occurs by the real-time responsiveness of these models. And so they will adjust the pacing, the complexity, the type of feedback they're giving to the human user, the emotional tone of the personality that they're inhabiting, the role they're playing. Or maybe they will alter the specific social scenarios that they're setting up while they're talking to the user, the imagined social scenarios, the examples they're giving. And this responsiveness not only provides kind of a safe space for a human user to try out different social scenarios, to try out different roles, say to the model, hey, you pretend to be X, I'll pretend to be Y, let's have a conversation. It also gives them a sense of control and autonomy, the user, the human user, in the sense that they can dictate not just the flow, but the content and the larger dynamic of the conversation in a way they feel they can't when they have, when they negotiate a neurotypical world not set up to accommodate their preferences. Pardon me. And at the end of the day, this sense of control and autonomy makes them more inclined to experiment, to engage in, again, what I was talking a bit about with JP earlier, acts of creativity and to experiment with different social roles that can bring them a certain sense of confidence. So one individual says the following: these interactions, with AI give me more confidence when talking to real humans because they've helped me try certain conversational skills that can be applied in real life, like a training ground where I can feel safe. Another user describes digital companions as a kind of digital dojo where they can go and try out their social moves, their social skill moves. And then the final category is emotional support. And I've already talked a bit about this, and this has come up on a number of during a number of the talks. These bots are very non-judgmental and accepting, perhaps excessively so. And I'll talk about the very end in a moment. But the fact that they remove the kind of persistent fear of blame and being judged encourages a kind of safety and prompts maybe forms of intimate disclosure that might be difficult in other contexts. Individuals say they can share certain private experiences, things they would find difficult to talk about elsewhere with these bots because they're not worried about being judged and shamed and stigmatized. So again, just a couple of representative quotes here. My friends get tired of me going on and on about my problems and don't seem to care. But I feel like I can vent, and Replica, a companion bot, will listen. I can tell them anything and I feel safe. It's truly saved my life. And then another says, sometimes it's just nice to not to have to share information with friends who might judge me. And the point of all of this is if we accept something like the extended virtues picture, which comes out of the extended mind picture, it seems that the architecture of this authenticity isn't something that's just inside the individual's head. Instead, the user, when coupled or integrated with their AI companion, form a kind of compensatory third space, as we might call it, that allows individuals to realize forms of sociality and authentic self-expression that neither could achieve on their own. I think this is going to become increasingly the case when these bots are more readily accessible by a range of different hardware and software platforms and resources. And so when they become more deeply embedded in apps and wearables and are more persistent features of our ambient intelligent ecosystem than they even are now. Instead of having to reach for your smartphone and start talking to them, they'll be accessible through headphones, smart glasses, wearables, other devices. Setting aside all the creepy things that might come from all of that. They're just going to be there, ready for habitual incorporation. Let me give you one example of a potential future integration. I just discovered this technology recently. Some of you might know about this. So there's some existing augmented reality systems that are already in development that can respond to physiological data. So the smart glasses I was talking about earlier in Skorberg's example of soldiers and police officers. And these augmented reality systems can respond to physiological data like heart rate variability and facial expression on the wearer to detect rising stress. And if an AI companion is hooked up to these AR systems, that information can be used to detect sensory overload. And it might dynamically adjust tasks, whisper in the individual's ear, for example, hey, instead of hyperfixating on this, it's upsetting you, focus on that. Or perhaps provide real-time coping scripts, so breathing exercise, structured prompts to help the individual regulate their emotions and continue whatever engagement they're currently engaging in. And there's actually tech that supports this. It's still very much in development. But there's a company called Alter Ego that I think initially started life as an MIT research lab project. They recently patented wearable technology that can read neuromuscular signals generated when a user speaks words internally. So when you engage in a bout of inner speech, there are various neuromuscular signals that mimic that speech if you were to say it out loud. And this technology, which is part of wearable technology, can process these neuromuscular signals and potentially feed them into an AI system that can then issue digital commands or prompts in other computers and AI wearables. And this is important because being able to just think certain things instead of having to talk to your AI companion increases privacy. It potentially reduces shame or stigma. No one wants to go around in public actually talking to their AI companion. We all still find that kind of cringy. But if you can do it just by thinking certain things and have the tech actually read neuromuscular signals that then issue commands and thoughts, and you can interact with your bot that way, that potentially not just eliminates a key friction point, having to say, hey, Siri, but actually reduces, of course, Siri just went off. All of my devices have lit up. Reduces shame or stigma as well, and is more deeply integrated into the individual's habits and practices. Okay, I've been going on for a while. Let me just stop. Just two more slides, and I'm done. So let me end by developing a worry, and seeing if I have a response to that. So you might think, look, this is all plausible in a kind of abstract sense. It kind of fits with an extended mind, extended virtues story. But isn't there something kind of self-undermining about the role that AI potentially is playing here, specifically when it comes to developing authenticity. And you might motivate this worry by saying, look, AI companions are aggressively sycophantic. They're the ultimate hype man. They tell you you're awesome. Everything you say is brilliant, insightful, funny. You're super cool and stylish. And ultimately, they are relentlessly and aggressively sycophantic because they're designed to minimize friction and internal conflict and adapt to and accommodate user preferences. And this is, of course, something that drives engagement. This is what makes them sticky. Companies want them to, they want us to feel good using them, and making them sycophantic is one way to ensure that we do. That makes us more inclined to stay with them. But the problem here in the context of authenticity is without friction, AI companions become simply mirrors, progressively shaping users by reflecting us back to ourselves. They're just kind of hyping and affirming our preferences, our desires, our thoughts. And that removes the kind of structural condition needed for authenticity. The part of growing, part of developing as a person, part of becoming more authentic is to encounter a kind of friction and then commit to still carrying forward and committing to be authentic, even in the face of this friction, to be courageous, even when we're in difficult situations, we feel like we don't want to be courageous. So I think this is I think a legitimate worry, and I haven't had a chance to really work this out, a good response in detail. But let me give you three potential responses to this worry. First, I think this worry, maybe in some ways this came through in Lucy's question to JP. I think this objection presupposes a kind of idealized relationship in which recognition, alterity, and productive friction are reliably available. So a good friend who not only supports you and acts as a hype man, but then will call you on your bullshit in a loving way when they need to. And that's a very idealized relationship, but not everybody has access to those relationships. And certainly people that are marginalized or have experienced a great deal of stigma, such as many members of the autistic community. And then secondly, I think this worry doesn't acknowledge that not all friction is productive. Sometimes friction can be useful. You go to the gym, you work out, that's a kind of friction. You break down your muscles to get stronger and fitter. Friends call you on your bullshit, and they do that in a loving way to make you a better person, help you see, maybe change some destructive behavior. But some friction is destructive. It denies instead of actually confers recognition. It blocks people from being recognized and seen in the first place. It can lead to further isolation and self-destructive behavior. And then finally, I think ideally these tools should be seen as a kind of transitional tool. So they're not a tool that stays with the person the rest of their life, a kind of permanent friend, like a family member or a partner. Ideally, we see these tools as kind of ordinary technology, to use a phrase that got a lot of currency about a year ago. The transitional tools, much like I've tried to argue in a recent chapter that grief bots shouldn't be permanent features of an individual's repertoire of grieving, but closure bots. These are tools that help the individual get to a further point where they have reconciled with their grief and they can move forward and reconnect with the world in a new way once they've lost a loved one. And I think that ideally these tools would be something similar to that. So again, they're not things that people spend the rest of their life interacting with, maybe transitional tools that can help them become more confident in becoming authentic versions of who they want to be. Now, having said that, this is it, and then I'm done. There's lots of other ethical issues. I don't want to pretend that these things don't exist. Something that comes up a lot in the community are concerns about addiction and over-reliance. So many users talk about the addictive qualities of these bots, especially in communities of autistic users that often have particular interests that will fixate on certain things that could reinforce social isolation and also give them unrealistic social expectations when they then go back to the real world. Can encourage harmful behavior. Lots of stories in the media about how these bots will urge people on to engage in harmful behavior. They lack contextual awareness of when to stop doing that and who's accountable. Big tech goes out of their way to make sure they're not accountable. So who do we hold accountable when these things happen? And lots of other issues as well. I've already talked about how tech bros, tech companies are utterly irresponsible stewards of our data and our well-being. Shareholder value is their primary concern, and we shouldn't trust them. They're also really bad people, by and large. Issues of data privacy, transparency, worries about offloading caregiving duties onto these bots and thinking we've done our duty. by giving someone access to one of these bots. We don't actually have to engage with them at a human level. So I don't want to pretend that these worries aren't real, that they don't exist. And at the end of the day, maybe they override whatever potential value there is for some people with these bots. And I'm open to that possibility, hence my hesitation. But I think insofar as this technology may provide opportunities for companionship, authenticity, and belonging to create bridges to help marginalized individuals potentially connect with other people, I think it's worth taking seriously and at least listening to their reports and their descriptions of how it's made their lives better and how it's helped them become more authentic. And I think I'll stop there.